my tip would be to begin with people in mind,
Yeah.
and know that the process is serving the people and not the other way around.
All right, let's start off. So if you just like to tell me a little bit about how you've ended up where you are now. So I see that you're the director of revenue performance. How did that happen? How did you get into it?
Yeah, absolutely. It basically started with a really quick conversation with my CEO. I think kind of at the time we both assumed that I wanted to go on the path of being a VP of sales.
Mhm.
And I sort of made it clear that I didn't want to do that, that just because you're in a sales role or in a management role, there's not one track in terms of like leadership. So the CEO naturally responded with, well, what do you want to do? And I said I wanted to own coaching and training in the organization. I also own the hiring piece for many of our teams as well. And so that's what I focus on. In terms of revenue performance, I really am focused on the entire funnel, and making sure that each of our three revenue teams, the SDRs, the account executives, and the account managers, are successful. So day to day for me looks like anything from coaching an SDR to doing an interview to working on some sales processes that will help the company, and things like that. So I did a quick search on LinkedIn, and of the millions and millions of people on LinkedIn, I didn't see anyone with the same title. So I wanted to create something that was a bit unique, because I felt that many leaders would focus on the end result instead of what are the leading indicators for that end result, which is obviously like revenue. And so that's what I really focus on.
That's really, really cool. I love that you actually focus on all three aspects and focus on how people get there rather than the end results. That's pretty awesome. I don't think enough leaders look into that. Something that I usually pick up from when I speak to people is that to them, like revenue operations have changed and blown up so much in the last 3 to 5 years.
Mhm.
So I was just wondering if you've had the same experience and how would you define revenue ops and how would you define the whole revenue function?
Yeah, revenue operations is super important. I partner with our RevOps person, for example, at Chili Piper, to basically make sure that the sales team has everything that they need from a tech perspective, a data and analytics, a process perspective, and usually broken into those three buckets, for what our RevOps team does anyway. And it's absolutely critical for us. It's something that we invested in very early on, less than 15 employees. And so I always say that like companies need to invest in revenue operations and also revenue enablement, really at the time of the sales team's inception, because it is just that critical to have those people um, kind of running alongside the sales team to make sure that the sales team has everything that they need. And I also think that this trend is particularly powerful because at the end of the day, you talk about people working in silos and how the silos are coming down. I really think that concept comes from the idea of everyone in the company is working for a business, and you're working for a business before you're working for your team. And the revenue operations function really helps you break down those barriers, right? Like a lead for marketing, being aligned towards revenue is good for everyone. A product person, a product manager, having their goals aligned to revenue is good for the business. And so you see a lot of these trends towards revenue in general as a direction, and then revenue operations to really make everything happen, is a very positive thing for businesses. I kind of think of them as like the scientists behind the scenes, like making everything happen. And so, our revenue operations person, um, we wouldn't be able to do half of what we're able to do without that person. And so, that's a little bit how we think about it.
That's a pretty cool way to think about it as well. I think when you start focusing on revenue and revenue operations and how it actually runs when you've got 15 employees, like you said, that sets you up for a great future. So that's insane.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the things that people forget, at different tiers of revenue, you have a different subset of problems that you're facing with scale and just things like that. When you invest in enablement and revenue operations early, you're really preparing to set that foundation and then to meet those challenges at different stages in the company. And so that's why, like, my personal philosophy is to invest in these things sooner, so that you have that strong foundation built. um, yeah, and it's been hugely valuable. I think revenue operations has been a very strong part of like how our entire revenue org and our particularly our sales team like operates.
That's a pretty cool way to look at it. I like your philosophy in that. I think not enough people view it in that regard and tend to leave revenue ops and just the entire revenue function until much later when the house is burning and there's no way to save the house.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I guess my next question would be, obviously we're talking about like adopting processes and adopting, revenue. So I guess what's the groundwork required to guarantee a successful adoption of a new process, would you say? Be that revenue, be that anything else?
Yeah, I think it really helps for revenue, or like the RevOps people that I've worked with who thought of sales or CS or AMs or the SDR leadership almost as like their customer have like done a really good job of like just like framing everything. So like starting from that place of like thinking of them as like a customer, and then kind of, for example, with a tool, we just rolled out a tool. It's the same thing for us for a tool or a process. And first, we get like the team's buy-in. Then we work with a small subset of that team so that it's not just revenue operations who is the expert, but you like plant someone on that team intentionally to like be an expert. So we just rolled out a tool, for example, um, where we made the decision that we like needed something. Then we went out and evaluated the vendors. We found the one that we liked and we trialed with them. Once we trialed with them, we really figured out that it's the one that we wanted, got it approved internally.
Mhm.
Um, Once that, even before we like sent it to the powers of be to like sign the documents, like weeks before, we had a couple of people like on different teams that would be using this tool, as end users sort of planted so that they would have a few weeks of like using the tool to build up some of that expertise. And now it's not just like sales leadership and revenue operations saying, hey, this is the tool or process we're adopting. But when you like give people a little bit of a stake of a process, they become involved, they help with the adoption, and it makes it much easier when they feel like they have an ownership. Then when you hit that moment of rolling out to the team, well, you already have a couple people on the team that know how to use it. They can leverage them. They help you sell it to the team. They help you with adoption. Now you're having a very proactive approach to, onboarding a new tool or process, and you stand it up very quickly, as opposed to like how I've seen a lot of companies do it, which can be like very reactive, right? It's like, I need tool, like let's freak out and go search for things and then like just use it. And then the tool isn't adopted well at the onset, and then you have churn implications like later on because you never adopted it well. And it's just like, if you think of this almost pre-onboarding process for yourself, like let's plant a couple people to look at it, while we're kind of selling internally. It really helps with the adoption piece. And we've done similar things with processes, right? Like, again, like what identify identify the problem that you're trying to solve, find all available possible solutions. Once you have that possible solution, get team buy-ins, start selling it so they feel a part of the process, and then they'll actually end up adopting it much better. And that sort of has been like a recipe for the past few tools and processes that we've onboarded in a strong way.
That sounds quite cool. To me, it almost sounds like an alpha beta test. You roll
Yeah.
something out slowly to
Mhm.
get someone's initial reactions and then gradually roll it out. That's a really great way of actually looking at stuff because, as you said, so many companies just roll everything out and then they
Mhm.
wonder why their team didn't warm to a particular tool. That's actually a really interesting philosophy. How did you come to
Um,
being accustomed with that?
well, it's actually funny. I actually used that strategy to roll out Chili Piper as a customer.
Hmm.
So there's like 60-person sales team I was working on. I was the first SDR manager, but I was like heavily involved with the tools at the company. So they would rely on me for that because the SDRs typically will use a lot of tools. And I really wanted a scheduling tool um, that was advanced. And, I evaluated everything. I, sort of had my heart set on Chili Piper, figured out how to get it approved and sold it internally. And then I was like, okay, wow, I got this approved. How am I going to get everyone to adopt it? And then that's the process that I used. And Nicholas, our CEO, was very excited. Obviously, it was one of the earlier larger deals for Chili Piper, literally before the company had $1 million in ARR,
Oh,
so super early. And I think he was like really happy with the way that I did it because it was very sort of logical and had clear milestones, and we knew what we were measuring against and things like that. And I actually joined the Chili Piper team like 8 months later.
mhm.
Uh, so that was kind of it wasn't my first time doing that approach. It was my first time being the only owner of a project like that. So, but I had done that approach before, and it had worked well for me.
You're saying that it was the first time that you were like the solo man having this approach. How
Mhm.
did that how did that happen for you? So did you used to do it with somebody else and then you just became the solo go-to man? How did that happen?
Yeah, I would say like earlier in my career, I was really focused just on the like sales coaching and just like when I was like an SDR and an AE, it was for a larger company. And so a lot of the tools and things were like figured out. There wasn't this like area to explore. And then I moved out to the West Coast in California, and I found like some of the startups were like more willing to let you tinker, and they were always evaluating tools and things like that. So really, when I moved to the West Coast and had worked at a couple of different startups, and that time I was like tinkering with tools more, and like the team like naturally would rely on me for it more. So I think it was like a size of company thing. I went from working for this big corporation to like 100-person 200-person
Yeah.
startups where like you had that space, and I think that that was the catalyst for me.
That's so cool. It's definitely speaking to people who have got like such a massive company backgrounds and then go into smaller teams. A lot of people always say that they get a much like bigger sense of freedom and sense of
Mhm.
accomplishment. Is that something that you relate to as well?
I think the biggest thing for me also was like the like learning has always been like an important component of my career, and I learned a lot working for those that larger company. I learned a lot of foundational sales skills and things that I had no idea about when I got started. But then once I had that kind of baseline, it was nice to then have some of that freedom afterwards to explore and kind of roam around and see what different tools did and try out different sales tactics. So it was really like a period of exploration for me in my career. And then when I joined Chili Piper, it was like that on steroids. With all of the hundreds of demos I've looked at and different sales methodologies that we've tried out and things like that. So I always appreciated that ability to tinker. Also, Chili Pepper was the first time I worked remotely,
Yeah.
and that really was like I I, I was a skeptic before, and now I don't ever see myself like going back to like the traditional office setting. Not to say I won't ever work in an office again, but not like I did before,
Yeah.
um, where the association is the amount of time you spend in the office is equated with how good of a job you're doing. And Chili Piper really leans into the opposite, which is autonomy over your work and things like that. As a result of that kind of thinking and remote work, last year I invested what would have been my commute time, like my old job in Los Angeles, for example, was like if you add up all the time I lost in commuting, it was like almost 3 weeks of my life in a given year. So what I did with that time is I invested it back in learning, and I read um, or listened to on Audible 36 books last year. So I think it's important to take like that time and like reinvest it back in when you're sort of given that autonomy. And it's like, oh, this isn't just like free time. And the cool thing about working here is I feel like it's a lot of like-minded people who kind of do this similar things.
Definitely. I think reevaluating, sounds quite deep, but reevaluating your life decisions sometimes is it
Exactly.
yeah, it really makes a difference to your work, to your personal life, to everything, doesn't it? And to the way that you roll out processes by the sounds of it.
Yeah, it's funny. You spend more time with your coworkers and at work than anything else, right? Like the next thing is, sleeping, right?
Yeah.
It's like that's where we're spending all of our time for the
Yeah.
most part is like with work and sleeping. And so if you literally just look at the amount of time in a day, so any like efficiency you get back from a commute or something else, and you're able to figure out how to reinvest that time back into something else is very, very powerful. And I think that it is related to like feeling more creative when I'm writing, or feeling more rested when I'm managing a team and not like so burned out, or thinking
Yeah.
through a process like what we're talking about today and being like much more methodical about it and not just like throwing spaghetti at the wall and like, okay, that didn't work, let's try something else. But really kind of giving you the ability to be like more methodical and things like that. And I do attribute a lot of that to the autonomy of the work and the way that we work as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that's something that's given me some food for thought as well, just to think about how to reevaluate stuff, which actually links me quite nicely to my next question. The whole reevaluating stuff and reevaluating processes. What could be the one thing that you could share that's really important for a successful process change that might not be as obvious apart from reevaluating stuff?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the number one tip I would give for a process change.
Hmm.
Um, I would, it's a little bit of what I said earlier, but people forget the people part of the processes. You can't just like flip a switch and have like, oh, everyone, we're gonna do this like new process, and the adoption piece is so important, right? Like the people part.
Yeah.
So my tip would be to begin with people in mind,
Yeah.
and know that the process is serving the people and not the other way around. And I see way too many like Salesforce admins, revenue operations, sales leaders, CEOs make the mistake of like, oh well, this is the process, and then people serve and it's not. The process needs to serve the people. They need to be bought into it. It needs to help them serve whatever it is that they're trying to do. And I can think of even like conflicts in my own life where you know, where maybe I felt someone was trying to go too much in the direction of the process for the sake of a process and not
Mhm.
thinking about the people implications of it. And I just think that that is so important um, to figure out up front, and then also like how are you going to sell it, because you don't want to create a process for a process sake. You want it to serve your team and serve your people, serve revenue as in your company as well. So that would be my biggest thing.
Do you know what? I spoke to a head of development, sales development the other day, and he said the exact same thing. And he said that people focus so much on the ins and outs of a business rather than the people, and then they wonder why people leave.
Hmm.
Which is something that you said as well, which I think is actually a great thing, and I think the community is going to be very grateful for that reminder, because I think that's something that a lot of leaders miss out on. Um, yeah, and I guess going into my last little question for you, which is a little bit more personal, but what was the worst rollout that you've ever had, and what did you learn from it? How would you describe it?
Yeah, I was actually thinking of that when I gave my last answer. So it's funny that you bring that up. It was like you're reading my mind.
I'm in there
Uh,
somewhere.
I think it was really along this idea of misalignment. And this area can get very gray very fast, right? It's many different roles are touching it, different decision makers, possibly things like that. So the thing that becomes critical is making sure that everyone is aligned and on the same page, and what you're executing is based on that aligned strategy.
Mhm.
And if people don't have that alignment, they need to figure out how to get it, or else like the ones that are executing it, whether it's revenue operations, sales development, sales enablement, sales leadership, whoever is the owner of this project, it can go sideways really quick, very quickly. And so I would just remember that. And for me, it was we were moving to an ABM model,
Mhm.
and a lot of the logistics were could have been thought through before it was executed upon.
Yeah.
And then what happened is, as a result of that, uh, I hate overused analogies, but it works here. They were like, building the plane as they're trying to fly it, which is like literally what happened when they were trying to switch over to the model.
Mhm.
Probably could have gotten vendors to help with it. Probably could have like thought it through a little bit more. And it was a tremendous learning opportunity for me. I kind of always had the hunch of think things through
Mhm.
first as much as you can and then try to execute. Obviously, you always have to iterate, but when you move to something so pivotal as like we were using a lead model and then we moved to an account-based model, really just make sure that you think it through. And the thing wasn't even the process piece, it was the people piece again. It was
Mhm.
different stakeholders being misaligned. So I would really kind of figure out that people piece and then spend time thinking through all of your options and how you actually want to solve for it before you actually start doing the work to do so. Because once you start the work, it's really difficult to adjust like midway through. So that would probably be my worst experience, but it taught me a lot about how to roll tools out. And I think the cool thing about it is it helped me prevent future mistakes at other companies.
Yeah. That's really helpful, and I think that's an important piece to pick up on, is that alignment. And I think a lot of people need to be more honest with the mistakes that they've made and how much it actually taught them. So it's actually really cool that you're able to say that how much it taught you and prevented you from making future mistakes.
Absolutely. I think, sometimes sales leaders are expected to have like all of the answers. The
Yeah.
more that I lean into the things that I don't know and like that vulnerability, I find that people can relate to you better, and they trust you more, and you're able to actually get like more accomplished. So, we don't have to be all knowing, right?
Yeah.
As just because you're in a leadership role. And I see a lot of leaders like cling to that. And I
Yeah.
think like learn from the mistakes and make mistakes, and like normalize that with yourself first. And
Yeah.
then you'll be able to normalize it with your team in a much easier way. So that's how I think about it.